more about Paul and Elvis, Angels of Aquarius, and MK Tavistock mind control and its fallout. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and I'll be right back with much more. Okay, we are back, and we're talking about Elvis and Paul, the 1960s Age of Aquarius, Ascension Angels, and all that good stuff. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and I'm working on the book cover, working on finishing up the book. We'll have that ready pretty quick. We may be debuting it on a large national radio show that I am a regular on, so we'll just leave that there as it is. Let's get into the story again of Paul, Elvis, and the Aquarius scenarios. Let's go ahead and get back into it. And these that you're looking at right now are the lyrics to a song called Beautiful Boy by John Lennon. And we will get into that more as it goes. But Paul McCartney has stated that this song is his favorite song composed by John Lennon. Beautiful Boy is off Lennon's 1980 album, Double Fantasy, the last album that Lennon recorded and released before his death. And McCartney has stated that this is his favorite song composed by Lennon. And when he was interviewed on Desert Island Discs in 1982, he said it was his favorite, which to me is very, very odd. Of all the great songs that John Lennon wrote, does anyone else find it strange that this rather obscure little song would be the very favorite Lennon song of Paul McCartney? I believe that Paul might have given us a key to an amazing truth regarding the subject of his MKUltra Tavistock mind control and assault by his selection of this song. And he may have forever put the Paul is dead rumor to rest, as we shall see. Now, McCartney's love for this song is more than just lip service. In 1982, Paul appeared on the BBC's Desert Island Disc television program. He and Roy Plomley, the program's host, are seen at the beginning listening to an old recording of McCartney, Harrison, and Lennon singing the old Coaster song, Searchin', way back in their Liverpool pub days. And then the program cuts to McCartney, who in his own words sums it all up by playing his favorite Lennon song, Beautiful Boy. Paul goes out of his way to make sure that he mentions that it comes from John's Double Fantasy album, which is interesting. It's a double fantasy. Where Faul, as we saw last time, was flippant, detached, and bored, Paul is very happy, almost giddy, as he recalls how their first fans used to request Searchin' over and over. His impersonation of the fans is kind of funny. And then John starts singing Beautiful Boy, and something really moving and really amazing happens. McCartney, deeply touched, kind of melts, his emotion spills over, and he starts to actually sob on camera as he listened to John sing. We saw Faul's reaction to John's death. Yeah, bummer. Now we finally get to see Paul's. It's a drag, man. Now we get to see Paul's. You simply have to find the video on YouTube and give it a watch. And my question is, was Paul John's beautiful boy? Now, they say the song was written for John's son, but it just doesn't add up to me. Why would this song prompt such a deep emotional response from Paul? Could it be that this otherwise unremarkable tune was emblematic to Paul of something extraordinarily deep and personal that he shared with John? Let's look at the lyrics. Let's look at the lyrics. Ostensibly, again, it was written for Sean, his son. Close your eyes, have no fear, the monster's gone. What if these words aren't written to Lennon's son, but to his dear friend Paul? What if the song had such a dramatic impact on Paul because John wrote it for him as a memorial of the great battle that Paul fought and, it could be argued, ultimately won? Did Lennon understand that Paul was the victim of vicious mind control assault? The lyrics could certainly be speaking of that, and it would explain why the inexplicable, why Paul had such a intense reaction to it, and why the song had such deep meaning for him. You can almost say John said, "You made it, mate." Clap Paul on the shoulder. He's on the run and your daddy's here. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful boy. I mean, it's even kind of Lennon-esque that he'd give him a little jab calling him daddy, you know, to Paul's little boy. Paul truly was a beautiful boy. Before you go to sleep, say a little prayer every day in every way. It's getting better and better. You can almost hear John encouraging Paul to be diligent, to keep heart, because he had indeed come out of the maw of the monster and was getting better every single day. And was John reminding Paul of something he himself said years before in the Beatles song, Getting Better? That things were going to be all right? By the way, Getting Better was released in 1967, about the time Paul's ordeal was to have begun. A poignant reminder indeed from John to Paul. Let's go on. I can hardly wait to see you come of age, but I guess we'll just both have to be patient because it's a long way to go. A hard road to hoe. Yes, it's been a long way to go, but in the meantime, it's almost a cryptic utterance by John. It's almost like he was saying goodbye. It seems that maybe John foresaw difficult times ahead, but he knew Paul would be able to grow and progress despite what may happen to John, and this seems to lend credence to the PID crowd assertion that Lennon was murdered because he was about to disclose the truth about Paul being killed and replaced. Again, those PID folks so close but not quite there. Beautiful Boy was written shortly before John was murdered. And remember what John's main passion was in those days. He was speaking out against corporate greed, corporate control, warmongering. Now I ask you, is it more likely that he was about to disclose a dead and replaced Paul, or that he was about to disclose a government conspiracy of mind control assault upon the two most famous individuals of the 20th century? Paul McCartney and Elvis Presley. I'll leave it to you to decide. Put another way, which revelation would be more likely to motivate a governmental assassination? Long way to go, hard road to hoe indeed. John knew he was facing a challenge. But in the meantime, before you cross the street, take my hand. Now, your mind immediately goes to Abbey Road. And John was reorganizing the immortal procession. In the original, John leads as the priest. Paul is the corpse. But John says now, take my hand as you cross the road. Whew. Is John telling Paul that it's his time, John's time to die, and that Paul must now step up and act as priest? Woo! Goosebumps. Goosebumps. It's dark, it's moving, it's poignant. It also makes no sense when viewed as a song from father to son. But it is spot on if it indeed describes what I'm proposing. Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. Beautiful boy. John closes by reminding Paul to be diligent and by bracing himself to do what he knows needs to be done. Song has all the testaments of a last will and testament, solemn exchange, and victory between veterans of a secret and costly war. In 1982, I think Paul musically answered John when he wrote a song called Here Today. And it's not just my idea. McCartney has admitted on several occasions that he wrote the song for Lennon. But as for me, I still remember how it was before, and I'm holding back the tears no more. Paul promises John that he hasn't forgotten the ordeal of the 60s or its cost. He assures him that he's dealing with it. What about the night we cried because there wasn't any reason left to keep it all inside, never understood a word, but you were always there with a smile? Could this be Paul's ode to the night they discovered the nefarious plot and plans that led to Faul? Does Paul go on to acknowledge John's decision to go public with the story? Is it finally Paul's granting a permission to his friend and a thank you for being there for him? And if I say I really loved you and was glad you came along, no commentary needed. The Beautiful Boy song had an impact on McCartney that was out of all proportion to the song. And in this scenario, I think what I propose makes much more sense. And one more thing. I got to cue this up for you. We're going to risk the wrath of the fair use copyright doctrine. Okay, so I've queued up the Paul McCartney on Desert Island disc of January 1982. All rights reserved. I'm just going to react to about 8 seconds of this video. And what you're hearing is John's song, Beautiful Boy, being played in the background. And you can see an obviously emotional Paul McCartney there. But as this camera pans down and the seed fades out, and I'll try to stop it, but watch and see whose picture they show next. Remember, this is a show about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and this is a BBC show. So, folks, this is what you call an Easter egg of gigantic proportions. So let's tune in and let's watch this again. Paul McCartney on Desert Island Disc, January 1982. All rights reserved. I'm just reacting to a few seconds of this video. And let's go ahead and have a watch and a listen. Oh my. Somebody explain that, if you will. Hoo-hoo. Whoop! More goosebumps. Is that not the Easter egg of all Easter eggs? John singing a song that he wrote for Paul about the whole MKUltra Tavistock mind control thing that was run on Paul that Elvis told them about. Ay, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Amazing stuff. And I'm going to show you where I'm coming from on this. Now, as the program closes, they cut away from an image of the weeping Paul McCartney to a photo of Elvis. I think it's irrefutable confirmation of the MK Tavistock assault on McCartney, as well as the fact that Lennon knew about it and was quite possibly about to disclose it and the whole program before he was gunned down. It also suggests to me that McCartney and Lennon knew about the astral assault on Elvis because Elvis told them about it and told them to watch out. This is compelling evidence to me that John did in fact know that Paul was under MKUltra Tavistock mind control. And let's go and look at more. One of the staples of the Paul is Dead culture is the purported clues in the album cover art of several Beatles albums. Again, the PID folks, I believe, have identified legitimate phenomena only to draw erroneous conclusions. Let's look now at some of the more famous and, in my mind, legitimate examples of album cover manipulation. They give clear clues to some type of monumental event regarding Paul McCartney. Now, this, of course, is the Sgt. Pepper's album. It's of special interest because it was the first one to show the dramatic change in the Beatles. It was Sgt. Pepper's that marked the end of Verdi tuning and the music that had been lifting a generation. Sgt. Pepper is where the glaring changes began. And the front cover is a graveside gathering, which is quite telling in and of itself, because the real Paul and the real Beatles are dead. They're gone. They're buried with the left-handed face. But the death of the Beatles is being pictured, and a generous portion of clues is doled out. You see in the foreground there was the big red flowers that spelled out Beatles. It's obvious that in somebody's opinion what the Beatles used to be is now dead. And again, I point out the left-handed bass to you, which is very, very emblematic. Additionally, there's a left-handed bass. The flowers also appear to spell out Paul. P-A-U-L. So we know it's Paul. A rather obvious allusion that in somebody's opinion what the Beatles did was dead and that Paul is dead. Unless you don't pick up on the subtlety, the transition from old Beatles to new is graphically portrayed, because on the left of the cover you've got the four Beatles looking rather somber and dressed appropriately for a funeral. They're staring at the grave with a shocked and stricken realization that they are now attending their own funeral. And immediately to their right are the new Beatles. It's clearly a loud and sweeping indication of the McCartney-centered change in the band. And I'll show you what I mean. Look, here's the old boys. Oh man, we're dead, bros. We're dead and buried. And da 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 da. Here's the fabulous new Beatles. Interesting stuff. And this is fascinating. Every single person depicted on this cover, other than the Beatles, are dead. Were dead at the time of this album publication. Do you think they're trying to communicate a message about death? Interesting. Almost lost in the imagery is the new relative height of the old Beatles versus the new. I alluded to this a little bit yesterday. A casual glance directed towards this will show that in the old Beatles, they're all of the relatively same height, save for Ringo. But if anything, it looks like George may be slightly taller than John and Paul. But look at the new Beatles. Paul is suddenly a head taller than the rest of them. All kind of the same. Boom! Paul must have been eating his veggies. Even with this goofy hat that George has on, Paul's still half a head taller than any of them. You like apples? How about them apples? PID researcher Tina Foster confirms my suspicions in detail on her blog. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And here's her plasticmaca.blogspot.com. I checked it out last night. It is still there. Whatever the great event signaling this dramatic transition of the Beatles, it was certainly McCartney-centric. And just to finish off the strangeness of the cover, the one overlooking it all is the notorious occultist Aleister Crowley. He of mind control and all that good stuff. And on the back cover, three of the Beatles face forward. Paul's the only one with his back to the shot. Magical Mystery Tour. Paul's dressed as a walrus. People say walrus is emblematic of death. I'm not sure, but Paul is dressed in black. The rest of them are in white. Abbey Road. Paul barefoot while the rest of them have shoes on. John in white, like a preacher. Ringo in black, the pallbearer. George the gravedigger. Paul the corpse. Paul's eyes are closed. The rest of their eyes are open. Paul's walking out of step. And he's smoking a cigarette in the wrong hand because Paul is a lefty. And I've seen Paul, I guess, on Letterman saying, oh, well, I just kicked off my shoes because it was hot. Paul was wearing, there's a video that shows Paul wearing flip-flops. And right before he got ready to do the scene, he kicked off his shoes, so that it was very much planned. The imagery is striking. We're seeing the unmistakable death and burial of the person that was Paul. And again, I've shown you that I don't think that means he was replaced. It means that he was under tremendous assault, and who he was, for all intents and purposes, killed. The dots to the left of the Beatles here form a 3, indicating there's now only 3 real Beatles. This is the back of Abbey Road. The fourth is not dead and replaced, as PID enthusiasts have postulated, but he's rather being killed as we watch. Makes it even more dramatic. There's a crack running through the word Beatles. And there's a skull barely visible to the right of the sign. If you look at this, kind of tilt your head like that, you can see it's a skull. 2 eyes. Mouth, kind of like a scare. What's that movie called? Scream, kind of a skull thing. Let it be. I mean, just look at this. Light, light, light. White, white, white. Dark, red. Blood, darkness. Do we really have to talk more about that one? In the Magical Mystery Tour, they're all wearing red carnations. Paul's wearing black when they're singing Your Mother Should Know. How about that? Your Mother Should Know. Faul says, oh, well, they ran out of red ones. Come on, man, this is a movie. Give me a break. Why Paul believed they'd run out of red flowers when the movie clearly shows him being handed a substantial bouquet of red flowers and then dancing around the room with them during the same scene in which he stubbornly, continually alone wears a black flower. Something's going on. Guess who was the director of the movie? Oh, it was Paul McCartney. Are we really supposed to believe that the director of the movie couldn't have obtained a matching flower when he was dancing around with a bunch of them? If he really wanted to. Now, this comes from Ludix.com and all that other stuff right there. You can see it. Stop the tape. Go there. Tina Foster says the song Octopus Garden may be in fact telling us that Paul was killed and dumped in the water where he's swimming with the fishes. You know, that is detailed research, but isn't it a much better explanation that the octopus, symbolic of the Illuminati, showing that they have their tentacles and everything, including the astral assaults on Elvis and Paul McCartney? Ooh, interesting stuff. Popular opinion has it that John was mainly in charge of the album art for the Beatles' releases. That makes these clues of John's creation or of John's approval, and I believe the accumulation of evidence leads to the conclusion that John knew what was happening to Paul and did all he could to tell the world while keeping himself and the rest of the boys safe. I'm telling you folks, John knew. Well, how did John know? This is Elvis's house in Bel Air, the one that the Beatles came to visit that night. And having uncovered, in my opinion, irrefutable confirmation of the MK Tavistock assault on McCartney, as well as evidence that Lennon knew about it, the question comes, how did he know about it? And the Easter egg shot of Elvis on the BBC show, I think, tells us exactly how they knew. Exactly how they knew. And think about this. If not for an ex-Pentecostal preacher, an Elvis fanatic with a childhood best friend that became the world's leading Elvis impersonator, who worked with Presley's entire former band, that was able, because of that, to sit down and talk for hours with some of the King's closest friends, and also came into contact with one of the leading PID investigators, who also happened to enter into the practice of helping departed spirits pass over, all the pieces of this conspiracy may never have come together, nor would they ever have been published. And the world would never have known of this unspeakable evil that was perpetrated. Look at that again. Talking about me, ex-Pentecostal preacher, Elvis fanatic, loved Elvis. My best friend, and we'll talk about this probably in the last broadcast coming up later today or tomorrow, he became the world's best Elvis impersonator. The only one to have reassembled and worked with Elvis's entire concert band. That allowed us to sit down and talk with J.D. Sumner, Larry Geller, Charlie Hodge, and I just happened to run into this Tina Foster, and I just happened to begin the practice of helping spirits pass over, and all these things just happened to come together, and if they hadn't, this conspiracy would never have come out, and this book certainly would never have been published. Like I said, good thing we deal in the unlikely. And remember, in '65, Elvis sitting in his chair, the Beatles sitting on the floor, Elvis, George, and John jamming. That night changed Elvis. John, Paul, and Elvis were together for hours. What do you think they talked about? What was included in the conversation that it made such a profound effect on them? Who knows what that incredible level of energy brought out in those men? Larry Geller's words lead me to believe, and Charlie Hodge's, that the combined energy had been cathartic for Elvis. He got a burst of clarity. He saw what had happened to him. And I believe that Elvis shared the story of his mental and spiritual assault that night with John and Paul. Everyone I've talked to agrees that Elvis never kept a spiritual secret or shied away from speaking his mind when he felt like he had received something from the divine. That's how John knew, because Elvis told him that night in Bel Air. The information shared by Elvis enabled John to piece together what was happening to Paul as the very same symptoms described by Elvis. The knowledge shared by Elvis is what ultimately helped Paul shake off the evil Faul. So really, John helped Elvis save Paul. And it's this revelation that's finally been pieced together from the Elvis Easter egg dropped on us in that BBC program, and it certainly completes the loop and ties a nice little bow on the whole thing. As Paul said, this does certainly sum it up. And I'll appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. Elvis Presley and Paul McCartney, 2 remarkable men. Do I really think that they are the 2 witnesses of Revelation? No, I don't. It's a metaphor. But it's really incredible that both of them were cut down after a 3-year or 1,260-day run. Were left lying in the streets, as it were, and equally amazing that both revived, at least for a short time, in Elvis's case. What an amazing story. And you may think, and it may be easy to say that Elvis was the weaker. He crumpled easily. He didn't have to undergo physical trauma and change like Paul did. But remember, Elvis lost his mama. And one can only sit back and wonder how a man like Elvis, so sad, so lonely, in such physical and spiritual pain, could continue to give so much to so many. I think we should remember the good times when it comes to Elvis. We should remember the 1968 Singer Comeback Special. We should remember the young Elvis. We should remember the 1973 Aloha from Elvis. We can even hold on to the tragically spectacular Elvis pouring his heart out in Elvis on Tour just months before his death in 1977. Now, I want to share this with you. Few people knew how close Elvis was to getting his life together. Larry Geller told me that a few weeks before the concert featured on Elvis on Tour, they'd been in Hawaii on the beach. Elvis told his closest friends he had reached a decision. He was going to trim his staff. This is before those idiots got upset and wrote that book. And he also told me he was going to get rid of Colonel Parker. He had hired a nutritionist, some trainers. Things were going to change. This was in July. Now think of this, folks. Elvis told me that he didn't want to lay anybody off right before Christmas, so he was going to make the announcement after the Christmas party and after he'd given the guys bonuses. He was going to make the announcement December 26th of 1977. Well, Christmas never came for Elvis Presley. We lost him on August 16th, 1977. I think that's an appropriate place to end this video. We'll come back later today or tomorrow and close with one more video on this subject. Sombering, thought-provoking. It should help us to unwind our mind. It should help us to unindoctrinate ourselves, and it really should convince us that now's the time to be excellent to each other.